What up, big dogs? I'm your host, Coach Craig, and this is Athletes Unleashed.
On today's episode, my guest is a high school student and high-level track and field athlete. We dive into his transition from playing football to doing track, his mindset and focus during extensive track meets, how he manages competing as an individual in specific events while being part of a larger team, and how to handle and prepare to race against elite competition. Please enjoy my conversation with Izayiah Lopez. I really knew nothing about track before I met my wife, and we started we watch it now, and now I go to track meets, I have a much better not only awareness of how popular it is and how many people compete and how wide a variety of events there are. Yeah. But I was at CIF finals last year. I went with Laura for shot put, and it was awesome. Being there in the environment and watching everybody compete. You're watching the best of the best in California compete, and everybody is insane. Yeah. So for you, what events do you actually do?
Most of the time I do the 200, 100, 4. I do long jump sometimes. Yeah. That's what I have. I won league with that last year, but it wasn't really my main thing. I just kind of picked it up because it looks fun. Yeah. And then I took it into it, went into CIF with that as well. Didn't place very well with that one. Yeah. But the 400 has been my main thing for a while now.
Okay. So would you say that I wouldn't say prefer running over jumping, but running is just more natural to you?
Yeah, it's what I'm better at. I don't really like running. It's not really a fun thing, especially the 400. It's kind of at the end of it, you just don't want to be there anymore. Yeah. But it's what I'm best at right now, so I gotta stick with that.
I have found that with a lot of track athletes, that they're very good at the things that they do, but they don't necessarily like doing them. Yeah. It's a repetitive thing where it's a pretty simple task. You're running around the track or you're throwing an object as far as you can. And I don't know, some people find enjoyment in that process, the repetition, and other people it just drives them insane.
Yeah. It gets a lot, especially because the 400 just takes a lot out of your body. Yeah. At the end of it, every time I've thrown up after every single race, no matter where I was. And it's always when you go into it, you're thinking it's about to happen, and then once you get to the end, you're great, now I'm here. And then you lose your lunch, and then you just don't want to do it anymore.
Is it just because you're pushing yourself so hard? Yeah. So no matter what you eat,
Yeah. So every time I have to get a plate of food.
I can see why you might not love love track. Well, and so that's an interesting thing. A lot of people play sports and dedicate themselves to sports because they grow up loving the game. So it's soccer. I grew up playing baseball too. I love playing because it's fun, and I find enjoyment in playing. Even if I find it hard not to compete all the time, but even when I'm just playing for fun, I'm enjoying myself. But it doesn't sound like you enjoy track very much. Can you have an enjoyment for it and still know it's brutal and you don't love it all the time?
I've met a lot of people that actually really enjoy running. Mm-hmm. It's mostly the distance people.
Yeah, you have to. You kind of have to if you're gonna run that far.
Yeah, they're all extremely different from the sprinters, because most sprinters, they don't like doing their race because it just takes a lot out of them, and you get a very little reward a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's another thing for track is you spend so much time preparing, especially if you're a sprinter. You could be done in less than 10 seconds. Yeah. World record pace. But how fast do you run the 400?
I run in 49.5.
Yeah, so in under a minute, you've been working and working and working. You go out and you perform, and then it's done. Mm-hmm. And if you don't win,
then everything that you worked for is for nothing.
Yeah. Well, some people might not see it that way, but I know the hyper-competitive athletes definitely do. Yeah. So how do you deal with not only your mentality going into those moments where you've put in all this time, you put in all this effort, knowing every practice going forward, you literally have one shot. I mean, you have probably prelims, but then when it hits the final, you have one shot and you have 50 seconds to do your thing. How do you deal with that build up, and then how do you deal with it after the race? I mean, besides throwing up.
It's very stressful, honestly. Like preparing for it,
Mm-hmm.
you think that it's gonna be like, at the end of the day, it's only a minute. Like you're running for 50 seconds max.
Yeah.
But that 50 seconds, it feels like forever.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you know the people that you're racing against, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Like there's a kid from Canyon named Jeremiah. I ran against him when we were younger, and then I run against him now. Every time, he's always like 0.2 in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw him at CF finals, I was like, wow, so this is gonna be it.
Mm-hmm.
And then sure enough, I ended up being, I think it was 0.1 behind him.
Yeah.
And he got the spot to go to state, and I didn't.
Mm.
And it was just like very, I guess heartbreaking, but
Yeah.
it was just very annoying.
Well, it's got to be frustrating when you put all that time and effort into, like, and also the putting your body through it. Like, it's a lot of work just to get that opportunity, and then to be. I mean, that's the difference in track between advancing and not, and winning and not. It could be a fraction of a second.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're looking at that 0.1, being like, what could I have done differently? In those moments when you realize, like, okay, I'm not advancing because of a fraction of a second, are you thinking about the build up to it and what you could have done differently preparing, or are you thinking about within the race, like one misstep or one slight movement and it could have been different? Like, are you just playing things over in your head as soon as the race finishes?
Yeah, especially during the finals, it was very windy that day, and I was thinking, like, if I would have ran literally any harder, I would have gotten into the finals.
Mm-hmm.
But just because of how I ran the race, because coming off that back 200, I kind of like eased off because that's kind of like my race plan,
Mm-hmm.
and I waited till the last 100 to burn out. But if I would have ran that 200 as fast as I could, I probably could have been in front of them the
Mm-hmm.
whole time, and that probably would have won me the race.
So, having a race plan, like, you obviously have strategy.
Yeah.
There, you have an idea of how you want to approach certain things, and I would imagine certain races. I remember watching it at the CI finals. You can see people in prelims, they just need to advance.
Yeah.
So they're not trying to burn themselves out because they're going to have to race their hardest later in the day or the next day or whatever, however the progression is.
Yeah.
So you have a plan going into the race, and if you just need to advance, you might shut it down towards the end. Do you, obviously you're thinking like, oh, if I had done it differently. Is there a time when you have a plan and then you're in the middle of the race and you're like, I'm just gonna go?
Yeah. I think it was my first time running the 400 back in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I ran against Valencia, and going into it, everybody was like, I don't think you're gonna be like a good 400 runner, because I didn't run the 400 at all for Hart.
Mm-hmm.
And then I only ran like the 1 and the 2, and I won in that, but I knew for a fact like the 400 was my race.
Mm-hmm.
So then I told the coaches, I was like, I'm just gonna run this one time and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
And then sure enough, I came out and beat them all by like a good 3 seconds, 4
Mm-hmm.
seconds. So going into it, I was like, I'm gonna just come out and run my hardest and see how that goes. And then once I got to like the last 300, I just completely throttled down because everybody was pretty far behind me.
Yeah.
And I knew for a fact that I had to run another race in like 10 minutes. So
Right.
gotta wait for it.
So the more I've been exposed to track meets, like, and just track in general, the more you start to recognize that the top runners are racing multiple times in a day because they're doing different events. Same with the field athletes. Throwers are doing shot put and discus, and jumpers are doing long jump and triple jump and high jump, and you're going back and forth between events. And I just didn't realize like the strategy, not only in an individual race, but understanding the strategy based on the sequence of events that you have, what you're better at, where you need to expend the most energy, probably like who you're racing or who you're competing against. So like, how do you manage that? Like, you have an individual race plan, but I imagine you have an entire day plan as well.
So in certain meets, like, we go against certain teams. So obviously we go against Canyon. That's like one of the best teams out here. I know for a fact that I have to try my hardest in the 400, where I'm going to run against one of my other like I guess, top competitors.
Mm-hmm.
But in other things like long jump that day, I only jumped once that whole day.
Because you had it.
Yeah, I knew I had that, so I wasn't gonna waste my energy doing that.
Sure.
I didn't even run the 100 that day because I wanted to save everything I had for that 4. And it just depends on who you're running against. Because if you know you're gonna have somebody that you actually have to run against, like hard, you're not gonna do much that day besides focus on running on him.
Well, and that's the thing too, is depending on, you can, as you advance through the track meets, you want to advance to league finals and then CIF finals and then state finals, ideally. You're trying to set a mark higher and higher and higher. So the faster you run, the better you're ranked in the state, and that dictates whether you get into CIF, and then based on your performance at CIF, it's whether you get into state.
Yeah.
So I know for some people, it's like, well, I know I don't have an opportunity. There's no chance for me to get in if I'm running this race, or there's no competition. Like you said, some jumpers, I didn't know, I assume, hey, you have 3 jumps in prelims and 3 jumps in finals, same with throws. But if you set a huge mark from the jump and nobody can beat you, you don't have to do anything. You just sit back and watch.
You just wait to the end.
Yeah. Which I had no clue about until I actually watched, a full track meet kind of unfold. So I think for people who aren't involved in track, there's really not an understanding of how the track meet operates. Like, it's a whole thing. Like, I remember the first real track meet that I went to, I was like kind of taken aback at how many people are there, how many events are going on at the same time. It's like, it's just a lot happening all at once. So for someone like yourself who's competing in multiple events, and you're probably dealing with larger track meets, especially as you advance, how, like, mindset wise, how are you staying not only focused on what you have to do, but managing each event as it comes up? And sometimes you're running back and forth between events. Like you said, you had to run 10 minutes later.
Yeah.
How do you, like, obviously physically it's going to be difficult to manage that. You have to control your output as you go, but I gotta imagine mentally it's a difficult thing to manage as well. So how do you manage that when you're faced with a long day of competing against good competition?
At most, like, invitational meets, I kind of don't really talk to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, it's just I listen to music the whole day, and then I know exactly when I have to be at certain places at certain times.
Yeah.
So when it comes to, like, being focused, for at least most of the day, I'm completely just worried about running.
Yeah.
And even, like, my phone, I don't answer my phone. It's all just music in my head. And then I guess when I see people that I know, it's kind of more of just like a, hi, I'm not talking to you.
Yeah.
I gotta pay attention.
I'll acknowledge you, but that's about it.
And especially because track is like such like the meets go fast if you are running a lot of races.
Yeah.
So if you're not paying attention, you will miss your race. And at the bigger meets, they don't care. Like,
no.
They'll completely leave you behind.
Yeah, they call you a couple times, and then if you're not there, they're running whether you're there or not.
They don't care. Or even, I think it was my invitational, I went to the Tiger Invitationals.
Mm-hmm.
I ran in the wrong lane because the clerk told me to run in lane 3 instead of lane 4. And my time didn't get counted at all.
Wow. Yeah, there's a ton of rules involved. And I understand why. There's so many moving parts, and they want to make sure everybody is getting recorded properly, and you're dealing with meet records and state records and all those things. So it's just the amount of things going on during a track meet, it just kind of blew me away. I was like, this is nonstop.
Yeah.
And I can see how if you're not paying attention, or if you lose focus, or you're scrolling on your phone, be like, oh shit, I gotta go run.
Yeah.
So I want to jump back to I'm really interested in, like, the track athlete's mentality. You pretty much torture yourself physically over and over and over again as a build up to these meets and races, and throughout the season, like you said, you might be racing against better or worse competition. If you know this team is not great, probably aren't working as hard maybe during the week, or you're using it as a recovery time. But that process of understanding all of the work that I'm putting in, the output happens in this short amount of time, and then when it's done, it's done. And I really like track because it's finite. When you see the time on the board, that's it.
Yeah.
And if your time isn't faster than somebody else, there's no objectivity, like straight up. If you throw farther, if you jump farther, if you run faster, you move on, and that's it. So when you're beat, you're beat. There's no referee. You know, there are referees, but like for the most part, the performance speaks for itself. And if you get outperformed on that day, there's nothing you can do about it. I've watched people who the expectation was this person is the best, and somebody just has the run of their life or the throw of their life, and they beat them.
Yeah.
That's it. You know what I mean? So when you're in those moments and the race finishes and you know, and it might be even a positive thing, like I just ran the best race of my life and I beat somebody I shouldn't have beaten, or I missed advancing by 0.1 seconds. Like how are you processing in the moments following the race? Is your brain even working at that point? And then what do the minutes and hours look like when you're done?
After CIF, like that one race, that 0.1 off, it was just completely, everything shut off for me.
Mm-hmm.
So like even talking to my parents when I was coming back home from I think we were in Redondo, no word said at all. Because it's just such like a disappointing feeling that if you would have ran any faster, you could have won. Yeah. Or during league finals, I could have had the 200 like league champ too, but I took off the gas pedal because I wanted to do better in the 4, and I only lost by like 0.2 of a second, even though I could have ran faster if I really wanted to. And it just depends. Most of the time, your feeling after, if you win, it's kind of just like okay, like I'm okay, I can advance. But when you lose, it's just a very, very disappointing feeling. Yeah. And you feel like you could have worked harder, you think about everything that you could have done better. And sometimes it's just, you couldn't have done anything better, you just got beat.
Yeah. Well, I think it is interesting. I think for a lot of high level athletes, and winning is a relief. There is joy in it in certain aspects, but it's more you're relieved that it's over with and that you did your job, you took care of business, you achieved whatever you need to do, and it's most likely like, okay, on to the next. And it's a relief. There's a celebration, but especially for track, there's always, until you hit state, there's always another meet. There's always more competition. There's always better people to go against. And so it's difficult to be like super excited that you advance because you're like, there's still more to go. But on the flip side, the losing and the failure aspect, like for me, when I play sports and when I coach and when I look at things, there's always something to be learned. You know what I mean? When you lose or when you fail, I feel like there's always something that you can take from it to help you be better. But I'm wondering, is there anything for you to take from it when you do everything you can and you do the best that you are capable of and you still come up short, not because you did anything wrong and not because you didn't work hard enough, but because somebody out there is just better than you and faster than you?
Especially running against people that I haven't ran against before. If I do lose to them and they're just faster, you gain like the knowledge of like what their race plan is. So when I ran against somebody for the 400 and they beat me by a little bit, I think it was like 0.5 of a second, I noticed that off the start, he does not like to get beat off the start. So now I know when I race against him again, if I come out off that start hot, he does not like being behind. Like he gives up immediately. That's why he likes to get out in front and try to make sure everybody's behind him the whole time. So most time it's just learning about your opponents. Even though you might not have won that race, it's kind of a learning.
Got it. So less learning about yourself and maybe opportunities for you to be better, but more like a strategic thing. Yeah. You can get into the head of your opponent. That's interesting. Track to me is just it's a difficult sport to wrap your head around if you're not in it, and even if you're around it, it's just like the aspects of it, even within it, are so different. Because if you're a runner or a thrower or a jumper, they're all very, very different and individualized skill sets. And even running, like to be a sprinter, like a 100-meter sprinter versus somebody who runs the 3,200, it's completely different skill sets. And that process of not only identifying like what are the things that I'm good at and where can I be effective within the track meet, but also recognizing that from meet to meet, like you might have literally done everything in your capacity to win. You might have an idea of how to beat your opponent. You might know, hey, I got to get off the start in front of this guy, and he still gets in front of you, and he burns you. And it's just like, that to me would be extremely frustrating, knowing at some point you come up against some people and there's just nothing you can do. You know, certain things like team sports or certain games, it's like the weather or wind or whatever can impact the game. Something crazy can happen, but for the most part, when it comes to competing just individual against individual, the person who put in the most work and is the better person is gonna win.
Yeah.
So it's got to be kind of difficult to just reconcile that sometimes. Do you ever go into a race like you're like getting into the blocks and you're like, I have no chance in this race?
Especially when I was younger, yeah, because I used to run against a lot of people in like the USA track and field, and there's some kids that would be running times that people run in high school right now. I'm like, yeah, there's no shot. Like, I'm not winning this. But I like, especially when you're behind, people run more. Like, they run faster. So when it comes to racing against people that you know you have no shot against, while you're not going to win, you could PR by like a lot, because chasing people, at least for me, if I'm in the front the whole race, I'm not running as fast as I can.
Yeah.
But if I'm trying to chase somebody from behind, I will get a better time most likely.
Well, and that's one thing we haven't talked about is, and another thing that kind of was illuminated to me the more I delved into the track world was, a lot of times you're obviously competing against other people, but sometimes you come up against people who, you know, their times or their distances are just way further than you.
Yeah.
Like you said, you're chasing them. So a lot of times you're really just competing against yourself. You're working to set a better time for your, you know, a better personal record. You're trying to, you know, outdo yourself in every meet. Is that, like, as someone who has no personal records for track, if you are competing and you get beaten in a race, you don't advance, whatever it might be, but you set a PR, is that a win for you?
Yeah, it's more about yourself while you are losing the race. Your PRs are kind of like everything you have. So the more you win, the more you do better in your races, your times, your jumps. It's just, you feel so happy with yourself.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you might not win the race, you still have that achievement that you beat your personal best. So while you didn't beat the person in front of you, you still beat yourself.
Yeah. Do you find that, so this is like, now I'm thinking about it, once you set a PR, right? And then maybe you just have a great day and you set an awesome time or distance or what have you. And now you're chasing that number for yourself. Do you ever find that like you just performed amazing in a meet, whether it be like it was perfect conditions or you were just in the right headspace or you had the perfect like build up to it? You know, you had a great week of practice or whatever it might have been. And then you're not able to hit that again?
Yeah.
Do you find like, is there a lot of frustration in knowing you are capable of a certain time or you're capable of exceeding the performance that you're doing, but you can't repeat it?
Definitely. During the league finals, I ran the best time I ran all year. That's when I hit the 49.5 mark. And then going into CIF finals, I didn't hit that mark at all. And it's very like upsetting because if I would have hit that mark, I would have for sure been accepted into state.
And see, that to me is like, that's got to be the most devastating thing, is you don't make it, but you know what you're capable of.
And you know you could have.
Yeah. But it's also like, you know, it's kind of up for grabs that day. Like you have the potential to do this well. You have the potential to do better. But I just like that mentality of fighting against yourself a little bit, where it's like, I know there's no question of whether or not you're capable of it. You put the number down. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, you actually did it. So is it like do you think it's a reality of like you just peaked at that moment? Like that was your peak of the season and that was the fastest you were going to run during the season?
I don't think so. I think it was more of just like what I decided to do that week, or like how I decided to go into it with my race plan. or just the day in general, because that day that I ran in the league finals, it was perfect weather, amazing. And then when I went to CIF, it was windy, cold.
Yeah.
Like, it just depends on your environment. And it's also very upsetting that people that don't run in the same place as me. So, like, if I ran in Redondo, somebody else ran in some other place that the weather might have been better, they might have that chance. They have only a split of a second better, but they advance instead of me.
Interesting. Yeah, that's kind of, I mean, I guess you see that in other places, but you know, when you play basketball, it's a volleyball, it's a controlled environment inside. Track, and it's the same thing with soccer, football, or whatever. You're outside and you're kind of dealing with the elements, but to think that because it's, you know, 5 miles an hour windier where you are versus where somebody else is, that could be the difference between you advancing and not.
Yeah.
Man, there's just so much that goes into like being a track athlete. Like, I don't know how I would manage that, the mental aspect of it, because, you know, like, you are competing against yourself, you're putting in all this effort, and it just comes down to whether or not you can shave that 0.1, 0.2 seconds off your time.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man.
It's very, very annoying sometimes.
Yeah.
You get very pissed off with yourself just because you know for a fact that you can do better, even though you didn't perform as much as you can.
Do you find that, like, practice is difficult then when you're not performing? I mean, like, you can't run that fast all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can't be in practice just like pumping out your best times all the time, because you're going to be gassed when it comes to to race day. So how do you, like, manage that progression?
During hard practices, at least, I'm not really running my full speed. However, I do like my own outside training with another coach, and that's where I actually do most of the work. Because meanwhile, we have people at Heart that have been coaching for, this new coach has only been there for a year right now. The person I've been doing my personal trainings with has been with me since I was 5 years old. Yeah. So while he knows my personal best and he knows what I can push myself to, the other coaches don't really know that. Yeah. So I know for a fact that if I don't give him 100%, I'm going to be in trouble, or I'm going to get yelled at. Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure he understands, like, how you run. He can, sometimes you can see it in certain athletes, like when you're having a good day and when you're not, when he can push you, when he can't, those kind of things. I know for me, when I work with individuals, it's, I have to tailor the training to them, what they're capable of, and where they're at mentally that day. And I'm sure you guys work through mentality stuff as well.
Yeah. He can definitely tell, because we used to have a like a younger group, and we always used to run a club team, or not even a club team, it was like a club track club. We all ran for a team called Phenom. It was, I think they stopped doing it 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We were all extremely good for our own places on our own races, but at the end of it, we all split up and disbanded, and most of them went to college. Meanwhile, I was the youngest, so I had to stay there behind with nobody else there. But he for sure can definitely tell when I'm not in a good headspace for that race, and he'll make sure he gets on me for it.
So you talked about, you started running track at how old?
5 years old.
But track wasn't your first sport?
I played football and basketball for a while, for 2 years, 3 years. Then I quit basketball because I had to focus on track and football. And then going into high school, I completely stopped doing track because I thought football would be what was right for me. And I thought it's what I was best at, even though it wasn't really it wasn't my best. I really wanted to be, and I believed that I could make it my best. But at the end of the time that I started playing, it wasn't for me.
So why, at the time you switched from track to football? Yeah. And you're thinking football is something I can be really good at, and probably go to college to do. That was the goal, I would imagine. Yeah. Are you thinking, like, I don't love track, I don't want to do it anymore, it's not really interesting to me, like football's exciting, it's a lot more fun. So you're thinking, like, this is a better path for me.
I was thinking it's what I like to do more, and it was more of like my family telling me, oh, well, football, you're good at this, like stick with that. And they wanted to see me play instead of me running. So I decided to stick with football, and then 3 years later, after a lot of injuries, I kind of just gave up on it and decided to go back to track, which I knew I was pretty good at.
Yeah. So you didn't run. So in that time, you're playing football. So it's freshman, sophomore, junior year.
Yeah.
How many? Like, what kind of injuries are we talking about?
Broken ankles, broken shoulders, concussions, messed up wrists, just every part of my body completely broken. It was not fun.
Yeah. I mean, but did you enjoy playing football?
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the games. I enjoyed the season. I enjoyed being on a team, like that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of it, it just like, once you get hurt, you lose everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think when you're injured, you don't get to play.
Yeah.
And the sport stops being as fun. And I think football is one of those things where the injuries are kind of inevitable. Like, you're hurling yourself at other people. Like, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Just you're hoping it's not as bad as it could be. So in those times when you're playing, you're enjoying yourself until you get injured.
Yeah.
And then when you're injured and you're part of a team, are you looking at football being like, well, I don't like this anymore because I can't actually do it? Or are there any aspects to it that were like redeeming even though you couldn't play?
Going to practices and games while you're hurt and you're not able to suit up, it's just like, it makes everything feel like it's for nothing.
Yeah.
But I guess like the only like benefit out of it that I got was that like you could see your friends doing things that you can't right now. And when you're in a game, you can't really like notice every single thing because you're so focused on yourself and what you're doing. But the people on the sideline, people that are hurt, coaches, they see everything. So when you're not doing a certain thing that could help the team out, you can say that to the kids or people playing. So for me, when I was hurt, I would try to focus on like the cornerbacks and see what they were doing wrong, and try to tell them like, hey, like you might not be noticing this, but every time he does this route, he's doing this before.
Sure.
If this is gonna be a run play, he's doing this little thing every time.
So you found ways to contribute even though you couldn't play.
Try my best to, yeah.
Yeah.
Because if not, then it kind of felt like you were just there, and it wasn't really enjoyable at all.
I think that's what happens to a lot of people, though, is they get injured and they either kind of fade away from the team and they kind of stop showing up and they stop being a part of it, or they're just there and they're just kind of depressed about it, or they go the other way and they recognize like, okay, I can't physically help my team, but there are ways that I can be supportive, not only root on my guys, but also find little things and try and observe players and situations and see things that you couldn't otherwise see. And I think that's for me, I love when players who can't play, if they're usually injured or something's going on and they're not available, but they still show up to practice, they still make an effort, especially in games. They're not just sitting on the bench, they're trying to be useful to the team. Those are the kids that I love working with the most, because they see the value in more than just playing the game. They see the value in being a part of the team.
Yeah.
And I mean, I played team sports my entire life. I learned a lot from playing team sports, and it's a very important thing to me. And that being a part of a team is something that not everybody gets to experience. And there's like a cohesiveness and there's a reality of everyone working towards a single goal that's like a really cool thing. And so it's fun to experience, and it's like there's a lot that goes into working together towards a goal, and understanding that just because you can't physically be on the field, that you're still capable of contributing to that goal, I think is something that I want athletes to know.
Yeah.
It's tough. You're like, unfortunately, the reality is you'll probably get injured at some point, whether it be, hopefully it's mild, but some people get pretty devastating injuries.
Yeah.
But I know that, at least in my experience, I've seen that it while it might be difficult to be there, and it might be difficult to know that you can't play and you got to sit on the bench and watch, which I know is not fun, understanding that you might be able to make a difference and help your team win still, even though you can't physically contribute, I think is a really cool thing.
Yeah, having those teammates, especially like on the other like backside of it, being the one that's playing and having a teammate injured, even though he's still there or still showing up to support, it does mean a lot. Yeah. Because even last year, one of my friends ended up hurting their ankle during the prelims, and he still showed up to finals just to watch me run, and it was like a big moment for me because it felt like somebody was there to support me, even though they don't have to be there. Yeah,
I think that there's just something special about being on a team, and there's like, when you're on a team, there are people who are like your really close friends, but the people that you are teammates with, whether you like them or not, are always going to be your teammates. Yeah. And there's always a level of understanding and hopefully a level of respect between you, and that's really cool that your friend showed up to watch you race even though he didn't have to.
Yeah.
Like that, I don't think people always understand like how much it means to see your friends in the crowd and to have people there rooting you on. Like the hope is your parents are going to be there. The hope is your family's going to come support you, but like people got other stuff to do, and they're taking time out of their day to come and see you perform. Like that's really exciting.
Having people there really does help a lot, especially with track, because not a lot of times you're not getting a big reward out of winning. Like if you win the race, the next race goes on without even a couple minutes going on.
Well, you don't even get acknowledged right after. Like you win, and then you got to wait a while, and then you go down to a different area, and they give you a medal, and it's like nobody who even, like in many cases, people who didn't even watch the race are there like, yeah, good job. And
it's horrible. You don't have any like recognition until you go into the bigger meets where you do get like a little medal or something.
Yeah, well, and it's like I said, winning's more of a relief anyway. You're just like, oh, thank God that's over. I can go home now.
But having that I guess family member or somebody in the crowd, it really does help. Like at finals last year, it was only my dad that was in the crowd because my mom couldn't make it, but it did help a lot because nobody else was there that I knew.
Yeah, it's nice to look up and see a familiar face and just be like, okay, there's somebody here I'm running for besides myself. So obviously I have a perspective from playing on teams, and it's different with track because you are, with the exception of like relays, you are an individual competing in events, but you're on a team. So I would imagine there are differences between like a football team and a track team, but can you kind of elaborate on how different they are and how, like, if you prefer one over the other?
I definitely prefer the football team way more. It's just like it's a brotherhood. It's completely different. Yeah. Everything that you work for with them is all in one time. Meanwhile, on the track team, people are running their own individual races. So while somebody might do the same event as you're not doing the same things with them. So at practices, you're not with them at all times. After practice, you're not going out to eat with them like that. So meanwhile, I'm on the track team. I don't really hang out with them in the track team.
Yeah.
Because it's more, you're doing your own thing, I'm doing my thing. And meanwhile, we're on the same team together. We're not really a team.
Is it weird at all knowing, like, you compete against people on your own team too?
Yeah.
So is it weird at all knowing, like, the people that you practice with and that you're on a team with are also your competitors?
Yeah. Running against my own team, sometimes it doesn't feel the greatest.
Yeah. Because
I know that some people might not be able to beat me, even though they try way more than me in practice.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. Because I know for a fact that they really work hard, but they can't compete at the same level.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting, like, I feel like track might be one of those things. Obviously, the people who are the best at it are working insanely hard. But I feel like it's one of those sports where if you're just you can be really, really gifted at this one thing, like not putting down the amount of work that they put in. Everybody who's at the top of their game is putting in work for sure, doing the extra work, working with other coaches, But you might be racing against somebody where it's just like, that person is just not as physically talented as you are, and there's nothing they can do. No matter how hard they work, no matter how many hours they put in, they're just not going to beat you.
Yeah.
And you might run into that too.
I run into that when I run against people higher than me. It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
Because you worked hard and you did everything you could, but they just have more talent than you.
Yeah. Well, and it's because you can win as a track. You can win an event as a team. You can win a meet as a team, and it's collecting points along the way, and the more the team performs well, the higher point total they get, the higher rank they are in the thing. But there are people, I went to the state meet with Hart last year, and there was one person there. She wasn't winning the meet, that's for sure, because there was only one person there. But it's crazy to see like all these other schools. They're competitors in all these different events, and they're actually competing not only to be the individual champs, but to be like the team state champions, which is, or like the team, the league, the meet champs of whatever. It's interesting to me, like the dynamics of a track team, because you are all individuals. You might be competing against each other, but there are still times where you're working together as a team, and the people in training are trying to push you to be better. Like you're pushing yourself, obviously, but you're training with people. You're working alongside them, and even if you might not hang out much afterwards, like for me, like when you're on a team, even coaching a team, I spend a ton of time with the same group of people. Practices, games, bus rides, going out to eat afterwards, whatever. You're saying the same thing for football. You spend an immense amount of time with this group of people, but the track team's more segmented because you have your throwers, you have your jumpers, you have your runners, and then you have your sprinters, and you have your distance runners, and it's got to be kind of weird to have such a segmented group of people, but then you all kind of compete together. You compete against each other and together at the same time. It's just a weird dynamic.
I like having the team with me a lot of the time, especially when we're racing against other people, because meanwhile, they might not win the race completely. If they still get second or third, they take that as like a huge thing, especially because a lot of times they PR behind other people. But it's weird having that split between all the races and all the jumpers and everything, because they all have their own individual groups. Like the cross country kids, they have their big group, and the jumpers have their own group.
Right.
But also, because I've only been there for a year, it's not very, like I don't feel as much of a team.
Yeah. Do you get excited for people when they PR?
Oh yeah. It's I know for a fact that what they feel is so like, it's an amazing feeling, because when I go through it, it's everything that I have.
Yeah.
It's the amount of joy that I put every amount of work into.
So it's interesting. Like obviously I've never been part of a track team, so I don't know those dynamics, but it is nice to be like, maybe not in the same way when one of your friends scores a touchdown or something, but you can still have that. There is still a camaraderie. There is still things you can be excited for your teammates for, and probably support them when they're not doing as well either.
Yeah.
In the same way that you were talking about kind of keeping an eye on, cornerbacks and helping your buddies when you were injured. Obviously, if it's a big meet and you're super focused, you're just focused on your own race. But do you ever find yourself like trying to help other people and point out things for them to give them an edge in their races?
For the most part, I can't really like focus on their own thing, especially if it's a big race. If it's a big meet, I only focus on my own thing.
No bandwidth beyond your own thing.
Yeah, I try my best to help other people out, but at the end of the day, like, you gotta do your own race. But for the smaller meets, like league meets, you can definitely help them out with some things. Like, some people don't have the same technique, meanwhile the other people that are ahead of them do. So when I see them jump this certain way, or they fold their body this way to get extra like 6 inches, you can go back and practice the next week and be like, hey, they did this, let's try it out, see if it helps out with us.
Got it. So it's more like kind of recognizing what they're doing during the meet and then trying to help them in practice after the fact. Well, that's good. I mean, it's it's cool to see that there's still some team dynamics to it. So you talked about injuries in football, then pushing you back to track. When was the moment where you realized, like, I'm done with football? And then was it always like, now that I'm not doing football, I'm going to do track? Or did you have to kind of convince yourself? Like, what was the process of transitioning from one to the other?
I knew for a fact that I wanted to go to college for something, because I couldn't pay for college by myself, and I don't want to put my parents through that. So I wasn't going to go through student loans. I wasn't going to do any of that. So I knew that I needed some other way to get into college. And when I hurt my shoulder, it was like start of last year's season. And as soon as that happened, I was like, yeah, like I'm done with this, because I know for a fact next year I'm probably going to get hurt again and then not be able to play at a good level of college that I want to play at, and then end up going to a college I don't want to go to.
Yeah.
So I knew for a fact that I can go back to track, which I was pretty good at, and focus on that and try to get the best opportunity for me there.
And you have some outlook, some opportunities coming up?
Yeah. I think it was about 3 weeks ago I got a call from West Virginia State, and that was pretty exciting. And then during the summer I was talking to the Fresno State coach, and I had the opportunity to go there as well.
So that's exciting. And then track season hasn't happened yet, so the assumption will be if you perform well, there might be some additional offers coming your way.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah. Well, and you actually said something before there that I think is important. You might have ended up at a school you really didn't like.
Yeah.
I think a lot of athletes, in an attempt to not pay for college or just an attempt to play at the next level, they sometimes sacrifice other aspects of their education or their experience to play sports.
Yeah.
And I think it's important, if you want to be a college athlete, it's important that you achieve your goal and that you pursue your goal, but I think it's also very important that you go to school in a place that suits you. You attend school in a place that is somewhere where you can thrive and challenge yourself, and also somewhere where if you're injured or if it's not track season, or you have time to yourself, that you're not isolated and alone and hating where you are, whether it be weather related or environment related or whatever it might be. You need a place where you can make friends, where you can have the college experience outside of just your sport. So I'm hoping for you get a couple more offers and you get to choose really where you want to go. I'm sure, Fresno and West Virginia aren't bad.
Yeah.
But and it'd be very cool if you ended up in one of those places. But I would imagine you've got your head on straight and you're ready to perform this season to show people that you deserve an opportunity to go elsewhere.
Yeah, I want to have more opportunities, just have options to pick from.
Sure.
However, at the end of the day, like for me, it's just going to be whichever place offers me the most money, because I really don't want to pay as much as I have to.
Do you know what you want to study?
I want to go into business.
Okay. So obviously, track is not something where you don't really make a lot of money doing track. You usually are competing through college and then you go to the Olympics maybe, but that's probably not the goal. So for you want to go to school, study business. Like, what's the ultimate goal?
Right now, at least, for what I've been thinking about for a while, my dad has his own business, and for me to take that over, I wanted to have a business degree, just so I can have that background in it.
Sure.
Or if I don't end up doing that, I want to start my own and kind of go down the same path that he did, because he started off without going to college at all, just doing his own ironworking stuff. And then I think it was 6 years later, he started his own business, and that's kind of thriving for us right now.
That's great. That's nice to have an example to follow. And, I think it would be, I'm sure he would love it if you took over what he started and kept it in the family. But at the same time, there's always opportunities for you to do your own thing. And I'm sure if you had an opportunity to start your own business and kind of follow his footsteps in a different way, I'm sure he'd be just as proud. So that's exciting, man. I'm ready to see you run this season. So I like, I've enjoyed our conversation. It's been enlightening, especially, I do know a bit more about track now because I've been more involved in it in my own family and in kids I've coached. I've been around it more, but less on the running side. So it's been nice to kind of get a glimpse into like the realities and the mindset that it takes to compete at that high level, and also to understand like no matter how you do, it just might not be good enough sometimes, or that you could come up short by a fraction of a second and have to deal with that. I'm sure that's on your mind going into this upcoming season. Yeah,
that's most thing that's motivating me.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, like the whole college aspect of it is kind of pushing me. That moment that I lost, that just replays in my head all the time when I'm training.
Yeah.
So to beat that kid or to get into the finals, that's my motivation for this year.
Okay, so CIF finals, state finals.
Yeah.
I'm envisioning PRs on the horizon.
Hopefully.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye out for it for sure. Okay. Well, I like to wrap up every episode and ask my guests if they have a piece of advice for someone else who might be listening, a kid who might be going through something similar or might be on a similar path. You know, maybe football players considering, or a track athlete who's trying to achieve what you're achieving. So you have a piece of advice for us?
A piece of advice would probably be just do what you love. Like, I knew for a fact that football might not be what's going to work out for me the most, but I knew I enjoyed it the most for that time.
Yeah.
So while it didn't work out for me in the long run, I enjoyed every moment that I could of it.
That's good, man. I mean, like, you had to go for it. You had to experience it, and you got to see, like, it wasn't for you in the long run, but you don't regret it.
No.
I mean, maybe some of the injuries, but that's a great piece of advice. I think doing what you love is important, and I would say most athletes who are very good at their sport or play it all the time do love their sport. But you know, some don't. Some do a sport just because they're good at it. And I think the process of falling in love with your sport is kind of a lifelong thing. So I'm glad you did what you love. It took you back to track and hopefully on a pathway to a college scholarship.
Hopefully.
All right, Isaiah. Well, thanks for talking to me today, bro. That's great. Good job, brother. Let's see if it's over there.
Big thank you once again to our guest, Izayiah Lopez, our producer, Malin Blade, and all the big dogs listening. Tune into our next episode for more Athletes Unleashed. Later, homies.